seriously popular.
Hello and welcome to Apocalypse Now, dispatches from a world on the brink. In this week's episode, as India launches an unprecedented 9 simultaneous attacks on Pakistani territory, do we really need to ask, is this Apocalypse Now?
These terrorists are often now in the sort of postmodern era ex-Pakistani commando and are able to operate with that degree of skill in order to be able to go undetected for weeks at a time before they appear deep in their hinterland in order to cause the kind of chaos that we've seen.
Many people need peace, but there is also a sentiment that if India attack first, Pakistan should respond it.
There is hope for us to return to the fundamental facts that remain, and that I think most Indians are happy to acknowledge that we speak very similar languages, if not the same. We celebrate very many similar festivals. We truly do have a deep shared cultural history, civilizational history.
Pakistan has been trying to distance itself from its past.
A view as to the vulnerability of Pakistan not controlling Kashmir, or indeed from the perspective of it being a jugular vein that is open to attack.
ChatGPT Plus is free for college students through May. Here's the thing. You've got a lot to do between now and then. Studying for finals, writing papers, trying to keep your life on track. And ChatGPT can help with all of it. It can quiz you for your econ exam, make a study guide from your French notes, plan out your meals and study breaks. It can get really specific on how you like to learn. It can even help you come up with ways to stop procrastinating. So from now until summer break, take advantage of all the ways ChatGPT can make your life easier. Restrictions apply.
Shopping is hard.
I can never find anything in my size.
I don't even know my size.
I buy my clothes the same place I buy my groceries.
There's a better way. Make it easy with Stitch Fix. Just share your size, style, budget, and done. Your personal stylist sends pieces picked just for you.
That was easy.
Stitch Fix. Online personal styling for everyone. Free shipping and returns. No subscription required. Get started today at stitchfix.com.
Hello and welcome to Apocalypse Now, dispatches from a world on the brink, the Daily Mail's weekly global news podcast. I'm David Patrikarakos, and I spent the last 15 years covering foreign affairs and conflict in some of the world's most dangerous places. But even I now have to ask, are we staring into the abyss? Pakistan won't take long to settle the score. Those are the words of Khawaja Mohammad Asif, the Pakistani defense minister, and they come after an unprecedented 9 attacks launched this week by Indian forces deep into Pakistani territory. One of the sites that India hit is the town of Bawalapur, 60 miles west of the Indian states of Rajasthan and Punjab. This is the furthest India has attacked inside Pakistan since the War of 1971. The question in India now is not whether Pakistan will retaliate, but when and where. The hope is that Pakistan's response will be designed not to provoke an all-out war. The possibility of that war, however, remains, especially given news that Pakistan's armed forces have been, and I quote, authorized to undertake corresponding actions in this regard. Meanwhile, Turkey has accused India of risking all-out war, while President Trump says he hopes the conflict between India and Pakistan ends very quickly. All this as the death toll continues to rise, with India claiming they targeted terror infrastructure only. Pakistan, however, angrily refutes this, claiming that civilians have been killed. What can be done to extinguish this enmity? Almost 80 years ago, India and Pakistan were ripped from the pre-partition Indian state. Theirs is an enmity that is eternal because it is congenital. Joining us from Pakistan is New York Times correspondent Zia-ur-Rahman. Zia, you recently visited the site of the Indian strike in Kashmir. Please tell us, what did you find there?
So yesterday I visited the site in Pakistani administrated Kashmir, which was one of the 6 sites which was hit by the Indian airstrikes on the Wednesday in the wee hours. So it was a mosque and there was debris, and like a room has been broken, doors have been broken. You can see like it, like a sometimes we see in like a war-like scene. Residents say that it was basically 4 to 5 strikes. Okay, in the mid of night, it was 12:30. It basically killed 3 people who was sleeping in the mosque. One was the prayer leaders. He was 80 years old, and also neighboring houses are also damaged. So it was basically amid of a densely populated neighborhood of Kashmir.
Okay, so you're saying that what India actually struck were not military targets, but a densely populated civilian neighborhood.
India claims that we have basically targeted breeding, militant training headquarters, like so. But it was basically amid of the densely populated neighborhood, and you cannot train people in 200 yards mosque. One thing we noticed in all these pattern of 6 attacks, they attack seminaries or mosque, which were basically linked with the militant group focusing on Kashmir in 90s until 2005. So this mosque was also used by these militant by until 2005. Then we have seen an earthquake came in Kashmir. It is devastated entire Kashmir. And then we have said that this neighborhood emerged as a most popular area. And since then, it is used as a community mosque where hundreds of people are praying 5 times a day.
You're essentially saying that it used to be a sort of hotbed of terrorism or a base for terrorists, but not anymore.
Yes, until 2005. One thing is very important, actually, similar to the other conflicts. The militant landscape of Kashmir insurgency has also changed over the decades. It is true that in 90s there was a huge support base. People are used to go and train and go to Kashmir to so-called fight against the Indian forces. But then after 9/11, when Americans came in Afghanistan, it basically pressured Pakistan to ban most of the groups and curtail their activities. So it was basically General Pervez Musharraf and General Kiani, the 2 former military chiefs, who basically curtailed their group gradually. At that time, there was at least 12 group which was part of one alliance. It was called Muttahida Kashmir Council. But now, if you see, you can only see only 2 groups. One is Jaish-e-Mohammed and one is Lashkar-e-Taiba, which also lost its relevance and its support base because most of its seminaries and mosques has been captured by the Pakistani government because Pakistan was under pressure of FATF, the Paris-based this financial watchdog, which accused it for terror financing, and to fulfill their demands, they basically occupied the most of their premises. For example, in Lahore, where big strikes happened in Murid K, which was the former headquarters of Lashkar-e-Taiba, it was now under control of Pakistani government.
So you're saying that India is working on intelligence that is 20 years out of date, if you're saying that this was last used for nefarious terrorist purposes in 2005. How can India have intelligence that's so outdated? Maybe 1 or 2 years, 6 months, I can understand, but 20 years from the country next door, that seems extremely strange.
It's a very important question that it is not only these madrasas which was basically hit. Since 2019 until 2023, there were many figures which was linked with the Kashmiri insurgency in 90s. And then they abandoned and they were running their own business, running schools. They were also targeted between this period, 2019 and 2023. It means that, number one, India is keeping all old files, whether these people are now involved or not, okay? Or their intelligence is so outdated, they don't know the recent current phenomena, whether these hideouts are used or not. So it seems that it could be that they're using like old intelligence files. So one thing is very clear that the attacks were precise. These locations were there, but not now. They are not now used as a basis of these groups.
Yes, I mean, look, the point is, I think that these were, both sides have accepted, and you've just said, surgical strikes by India. And you're saying that this was a mosque under the use of jihadi groups in the 90s, and since then it has become a community mosque, which I guess, given the amount of surveillance India has on Kashmir, it's strange that that they would have struck something with such outdated intelligence. But I guess as things move forward, more information will emerge. Let me ask you something else. Is there any sense in Pakistan that India was justified at all in launching strikes generally? After all, there are transnational Pakistani-based terror attacks on India and have been for quite a while. What's the feeling there, Zia?
We talk to many people, the common people, experts, political leaders. Issue is that one thing is that Pakistan is itself surrounded by its own regional security. On their western border, the Taliban ruled Afghanistan. There are more cross-border infiltration, and they're carrying out major attacks inside the Pakistan. On the Iran side, we have also seen often cross-border attacks, like in last year, but recently there was tit-for-tat airstrike, first for Iran, then for Pakistan. So this border, the LOC and the Indian border, it was largely like not busy. So because the Pakistani entire military was engaged on that side. Number one, I think that Pakistan cannot afford to open a new front when you are facing already very insecure atmosphere. The militant groups, whether either Taliban militants or it is Islamic State or it is Baruch separatists, who are targeting Pakistani military and Chinese interests. Number two, you need money. Okay, you have under the conditions of the IMF. Number three, which is very important, Pakistan has been trying to distance itself from its past of the 90s because they want to go ahead, and also it is a part of the international commitment. Okay, so we have seen that from many years the Pakistan has been saying, okay, it was the old thing. Like recently, the Pakistan Defense Minister Khwaja Asif told several publications, including Sky TV, that okay, yes, we supported in 90s, but it was basically a war on terror because Pakistan was used by the US against Soviets in Afghanistan and other wars, and it was byproduct. So I think in this scenario, when you have money, you have your own political chaos, and you have your own internal security threats from very hardcore terrorist attack. Like for example, like in one attack, sometime they killed 100 people, 140 people in suicide attacks. So I think, yeah, in feeling in Pakistan generally, that there should be peace. Okay, they cannot afford a new front because they are already bearing the brunt of the domestic terrorism.
Okay, so you're telling me that Pakistan is fighting conflicts on various fronts, and they have to be very judicious in opening any new ones. Let me ask you something else then. In that vein, Pakistani Prime Minister Sharif has come out and said that Pakistan has responded to India's strikes by downing Indian jets, a claim Delhi has not confirmed. Does this give Pakistan an off-rank, an ability to save face and avoid escalation?
I think it is a very important thing when there is a conflict. You cannot see any official confirmation from both sides. Okay, so it depends on the local journalists for both sides. Like for example, if India claims that we have targeted hideouts, but on the ground there is nothing. I don't know about the Pakistani claim whether they have hit Indian jets or not, but there are many reports jets has been shut down. So I think in this situation, it is hard for us like journalists to verify the government accounts. But you're right that it was very face saving for Pakistan. Yesterday, the Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif spoke to Parliament and then he spoke to the nation via televised speech, and he said that okay, like we basically shoot down several jets. So it was a sort of a victory, or you can say their claim on them and their air force capacity. Yes.
Okay, Zia, you were at the site yesterday. Can you please describe to me what you found there?
So one thing is very clear that there was not a militant training site. Okay. One thing can be, but it cannot be proved that whether some people are visiting there. But I think in this densely populated area on the main road, in this social media age, you cannot hide these things from the people. So we talked to many people, and again, they said that it was our community mosque, and basically, we know the people who had died. He was 80 years old. We are leaders, and there was on that day. We also see that like it happened in Pakistan that where there is any militant attack, terrorist attack inside Pakistan internally. So basically, military or police cordon off the area because otherwise, most people will come there, visit there. So there was cordon off the things. And yes, media was allowed. Many people working for foreign publications, they visited there. We also talked to the neighbor. So it seems that it was not it basically denies the Indian claim that they basically hit a terrorist training camp.
So Zia, given everything you've just told me, what is the mood on the ground generally in Pakistan about these latest clashes?
Since their partition in 1947, there is a very tense situation between the two countries. They have fought civil wars. So one thing is that many people need peace, but there also a sentiment that if India attack first, Pakistan should respond it, because it is the issue of the defending your own land. So we have seen it very clearly in Pakistan. But again, most people say that there should be some peace talks and the international community should intervene and stop this thing from escalating more.
Zia-ur-Rehman, thank you. When we come back, I'll be speaking to Indian national security analyst Sajin Shah.
This episode is brought to you by Netflix. 3 couples, 4 vacations, a lot to unpack. Watch The 4 Seasons, a new series starring comedy favorites Tina Fey, Steve Carell, Will Forte, Coleman Domingo, and more in a hilarious and heartfelt love letter to long-term relationships. Based on the original Alan Alda film. Watch The 4 Seasons, streaming now only on Netflix.
Morning decisions. A creamy mocha frappuccino drink? A sweet vanilla? Maybe a smooth caramel or that white chocolate mocha. Whichever you choose, delicious coffee awaits. Start your day with bottled Starbucks Frappuccino drinks. Pick up a bottle near you wherever you buy your groceries.
Welcome back to Apocalypse Now, dispatches from a world on the brink. Now I speak to Indian national security analyst Sajin Shah. Sajin, thank you for being with us today. These two countries, India and Pakistan, have been at each other's throats since partition, since they were both founded almost 80 years ago. There have been repeated clashes between the two states. Should we be surprised at this escalation?
Well, I think, as you say, David, surprise is perhaps not what I'd use to describe reactions on either side of the border in relation to this response or strike by India. I'm not sure I'd use the word escalation to describe it either. I think I'd actually say that this is a fairly systematic, well-calibrated, sort of threading the needle sort of operation by the Indians.
Okay, take us back to this attack on the 22nd of April, the deadliest on civilians in Kashmir in decades, which acted as a flashpoint for the latest clashes. According to witnesses, the attack was carried out by gunmen in military fatigues who emerged from a nearby forest. What can you tell us about the events of that day?
Well, David, if you don't mind, I'd like to take our viewers back about a week before the 22nd and the attack that you described in Pahalgam, which, of course, was a significant tragedy. A week before, what I think passed under the radar for most people is this fairly incendiary speech delivered by the chief of the Pakistan Army, General Asim Munir. And it was a particularly telling speech, A, because of the audience. He was addressing non-resident Pakistanis, effectively foreign citizens of Pakistani origin, at an event. And what stood out to me, and I think close observers of Pakistan all over the world, was the intransigence and almost the Islamo-fascist superiority ideology that the general clearly expressed to resounding applause, during which he also calls out Kashmir specifically as Pakistan's jugular vein, which one could look at either as a defensive view as to the vulnerability of Pakistan not controlling Kashmir, or indeed from the perspective of it being a jugular vein that is open to attack. And then a week later, we see the incident that you described. And then you mentioned also battle fatigues and appearing sort of hundreds of kilometers within Indian-controlled Kashmir to slaughter civilians. And I think that an interesting component of that is the high degree of tradecraft, almost special operations level skill that has been displayed by the latest iteration of cross-border militants. These terrorists are often now in the sort of postmodern era ex-Pakistani commando and are able to operate with that degree of skill in order to be able to go undetected for weeks at a time before they appear deep in their hinterland in order to cause the kind of chaos that we've seen.
So I think it's very interesting what you say, because in that speech, didn't the general talk about the utter superiority of Islamic civilization? And there is something else that you mentioned, this reference to Kashmir as Pakistan's jugular, which strategically it simply is not. Is this actually a case where emotion rather than geopolitics is playing a significant role?
Well, emotion, like religion for the longest time, David, in the Pakistani context, has been more a tool of state policy, an instrument of state policy utilized by the Pakistan GHQ and the army, or what within Pakistan is referred to as the establishment. So for many decades now, the sort of more nuanced analysis of the Pakistani elite was that, yes, Islam was utilized as a tool for population control, population distraction, as well as in order to play various geostrategic cards. But it was never truly the endpoint or the actual belief system or the ideology of the elite. So, the old saying is that the general will discuss Islam in public and then will be sipping a glass of whiskey in the evening, a la the British Indian Army of yesteryear. And that simply is no longer the case. And I think that what most people have not recognized is the gradual seep of extremist interpretations of Islam all right through Pakistani society, combined with the economic depredations of the last few decades, has caused them to lose control of this ideology. And it has finally seeped also into the elite. And so I think the thing worth noting is that General Asim Munir is perhaps the first truly Islamist chief of the Pakistan army that is a Quranic expert himself and regularly quotes verses from the Quran. And to your point about his reference to Islamic superiority, it was fascinating for me to watch that in that speech, he wasn't just referring to Hindus as the great other. He was actually extolling Pakistanis that now live abroad to quote unquote never forget that they come from a superior culture to the West and that they come from a superior culture to Hindus. And so it was again fascinating for me to watch such an explicit identification with really core Islamic ideology from the Pakistani army chief. And the other thing, really quickly to quote David from that same speech, is that he claimed completely ahistorically that there have only ever been two truly Islamic states in history on this planet. The first one founded by the Prophet himself in Medina, and the second one is glorious Pakistan. So it just reflects again the extent to which I think for the most part the world has failed to recognize that in many ways Pakistan is truly an extremist Islamic, or I should say Islamist, nuclear-powered state. And incidents like Pahalgam or 26/11 in 2008 or any of the other long incidents that we've had are sort of reflections of an instrumentalization of that Islamist extremism as a matter of state policy by the Pakistan army for many decades now.
So the Pakistanis would say that recent years have seen in India a growth of a kind of more extreme Hindu nationalism. How would you respond to a charge like that?
Well, I would start by pointing out explicitly the participants in the press conference held by the Indian government in the immediate aftermath of these strikes, which included a person of the Muslim faith, but a proud officer of the Indian Armed Forces. I will point out the enormous representation across our police forces, our armed forces, our political establishment, media, arts, entertainment, and culture. And also just take a step back and point out that we have the world's second largest Muslim population. So I often like to make the point that Muslims aren't a minority in India. They're simply the second largest majority. And I think across the board, prognostications of India having become a Hindu extremist state under Prime Minister Modi are just frank exaggerations bordering on disinformation. One simply could not maintain the unity and cohesion that one would need to in order to just run the day-to-day in India if there really was a systematic oppression of any community ongoing.
On Wednesday, the Indian government held a press briefing in Delhi to share information about the terror camps they targeted. What do we know about the accuracy and validity of these targets? Because we're hearing stuff out of Pakistan now that the strikes were based on outdated intelligence and ended up merely killing innocents.
It is very hard for us on the outside to know or understand, A, the intelligence in advance, and then B, the actual last-minute confirmation of who was present or not at these locations. What I can say is these strikes were clearly very precise. There have been images and video released by the Indian government both during that briefing and thereafter, which show you before and after. And instead of buildings that have entirely been destroyed, you see these very precise projectile holes that have then, caused the destruction on the inside of the building that they must. And so net, my somewhat research confirmation and summary of the operation is these were not strikes that saw Indian assets cross the border. These were beyond visual range strikes launched from deep within Indian territory, launched precisely to avoid both civilian casualties as well as remain well away from Pakistani military targets. And the interesting thing, David, is India has a legitimate set of targets in Pakistan precisely because this terror infrastructure exists. And from an escalatory standpoint, I think that the core bind or fix that Pakistan finds itself in is there is no equivalent target in India. There are no militant groups. There's no legitimate separation from both civilian targets and military targets available in India. So any response from Pakistan must either target troops in uniform on the Indian side or civilians, both of which are fundamentally escalatory by comparison to the Indian claim that we've hit squarely terror infrastructure across the border. And so at a high level, David, I think that what we've seen is a combination of air and ground-based strikes, extremely precise, limited, designed to send a message regarding cross-border terrorism rather than a broader message about India's relationship with Pakistan, with the Pakistani people, with the Pakistani state, and also designed to minimize the chances of misunderstanding, misinformation, confusion leading to escalation. If you don't mind, what I will state is one only has to look at the overall picture of where India is, the relationships that we enjoy now with the Russian Federation, the United States, the fact that we've managed to manage our relationship with the People's Republic of China as well, fairly well. And the broad arc of Indian diplomacy really has been to de-hyphenate India from Pakistan. There's simply no comparison between the two countries and their trajectories anymore, not economically, not culturally, not from the perspective of education, skill, or talent. And India simply isn't interested, therefore, in a broader conflict with Pakistan. What we'd like to see is a permanent end to cross-border terrorism and to the use of asymmetric tactics by the Pakistani state.
So this is interesting. You are absolutely correct. India is turning its colossal ship of state toward China. You know, we in the West see India as a great bulwark against China. Is this, though, a reminder that you cannot turn the ship completely away from Pakistan?
This is exactly right. And this is a very well-established pattern, even within Pakistani politics domestically and as it interacts with the international system. What we've noticed over decades now is that there is an ebb and flow in terms of the popularity of the Pakistani establishment, i.e. the army and its related organs within domestic Pakistani society. And their chief option whenever they're at a low point of that local control is to regenerate a conflict, re-accelerate the great other in order to unify the Pakistani people, utilize emotion, as you stated, utilize religion, symbolism, imagery, in order to fundamentally distract people from the core failings of the Pakistani state as it relates to their domestic outcomes for their population. And so in many ways, this is a reminder to the United States, it's a reminder to China, it's a reminder to India, that in the middle of this global upheaval, trade and tariffs and a new geostrategic reality, one mustn't forget Pakistan.
You talked about escalation. Both countries are, of course, nuclear powers. You also mentioned that. Now, India and Pakistan understand each other's nuclear doctrine pretty well, I think, after all these years. But there is, of course, always the problem of miscommunication. What do you feel about the prospects of escalation, or do you think this is going to be contained?
Well, David, I'd like to lay out, since you mentioned nuclear doctrine, I'd like to lay out first a distinction, for the sake of your viewers, between Indian and Pakistani nuclear doctrine. So India, to begin with, has established right from day one and consistently maintained a no first strike policy. So we've declared publicly to all nations that the Indian nuclear arsenal is purely a deterrent structure meant to allow us to have second strike capabilities in the event that nuclear weapons are used against India. To contrast that, Pakistani nuclear doctrine maintains the right to first strike, and, you know, from their perspective, reasonably so, given their conventional inferiority vis-a-vis the Indian armed forces. But there's really an additional layer to the way Pakistani nuclear doctrine has been expressed, David. They've expressed it, and there's a Hindi phrase for this that I like to use, but I think best translated in English as the crazy Ivan strategy. So Pakistani nuclear doctrine really tries to send a message to the world that, hey, we're actually crazy enough to use these things if things get too hot on the conventional battlefield. And it's that message of, hey, we actually have a fairly low threshold to activate our nuclear arsenal that they believe is their best deterrent vis-a-vis India or any other adversaries. And so in that context, the sort of game that's been played over the last many decades again is, to what extent can Pakistan use its crazy Ivan nuclear doctrine in order to be able to maintain the low-intensity asymmetric war with India while continually deterring India from doing anything significant across the border? And really, with the advent of this government over the last decade or so in India, what we've seen is India starting to call that bluff. India really asking itself, well, they say they're crazy enough to use their nuclear weapons, but at what stage do they actually use their nuclear weapons? And how far can we go in order to truly express what is now a zero tolerance policy as far as terrorism is concerned in Kashmir or in any other part of India.
A word you used is transnational terror groups, entirely correctly. Let's talk about some transnational terror groups. Afghanistan's Taliban government, who we know are long friends of Pakistan. Where was bin Laden found hiding, after all? They have said that any further escalation is, and I quote, not in the interests of the region. Clearly a veiled threat. Should we be surprised to see perhaps actions by other Islamist jihadist terror groups?
One must acknowledge that there is a transnational, multi-continental nature to this network of jihadism globally. And fascinatingly, even the Sunni-Shia divide sometimes seems to not matter when it comes to these networks, which otherwise seems to matter a whole lot. And the great example, of course, is Hamas vis-a-vis Iran. That said, you also mentioned Afghanistan and the Taliban, and that's a much more interesting and I think slightly more complicated picture at the moment. Because what we've seen with sort of Taliban 2.0 after the American withdrawal is actually as a follow-up with deep Indian investment in Afghanistan during US occupation and support with reconstruction. We helped build their parliament building. We built lots of schools and roads and hospitals and so on and so forth all over the country. There's been this sort of quite quiet rapprochement between India and Afghanistan. And all of a sudden, the Pakistani relationship with the Taliban has suffered greatly. So just look at the news over the last couple of years, the extent to which you've had border skirmishes on Pakistan's western border, which otherwise was always considered and defined by the Pakistani army as its own strategic backyard, its own source of strategic depth. And they sort of always assumed that a Taliban government in Afghanistan would be fundamentally pro-Pakistani. But I think to their horror, they've found that Afghanistan 2.0 or the Taliban 2.0 in Afghanistan are actually very different, much more Afghan nationalists and interested in truly slowly and in their own way allowing Afghanistan to enter the international community. And you see this through their engagements with India. You see this through their engagements with other powers, including the United States. There's, again, quiet negotiations on, I think, with a number of global powers. I think Afghanistan is a very different scenario. And I would therefore even interpret their statements in relation to this particular set of events as actually being directed at Pakistan rather than India. I think there's a whole lot of dynamics to do with Pashtun populations that are from Afghanistan, that live in Pakistan, that have recently been being deported en masse. One might even call it the mass displacement of a Pashtun population from Pakistan. And so I think all of those dynamics make for a very different situation as far as that particular regime is concerned and India-Pakistan dynamics. And then to answer the broader question, do we expect retribution of some kind from jihadist groups all over the world? Perhaps, but it's a long fight that we've fought for many decades now in conjunction with, the West and so on and so forth. And so I think that the Indian security infrastructure is well prepared to be able to deal with those ongoing threats.
So in India, the government has begun ordering civil defense drills, showing members of the public how to help injured, find safe places to hide, etc. What is the feeling on the ground there?
I'll be honest with you, David. I think a lot of this is signaling, and it's important signaling. I think one of the signals that India has been interested in sending out is that it is not an emotional power. It does not make emotional decisions. It makes very precise decisions in relation to military action, but it's also wanted to signal a firm determination attached to that zero tolerance for terrorism, i.e., a willingness to enter into a longer, more drawn-out conflict if Pakistan were to choose to escalate and so on and so forth. And so I think things like the civil drills that you've called out have a dual purpose. Of course, the core purpose of actually preparing the civilian population in the eventuality of a broader conflict all along the border, but also to signal across the border and globally that India is truly willing to continue this in case that's the direction that the other side takes it in.
So I wrote a piece today, in fact, it's out, and I talk about, I use this metaphor. India and Pakistan were founded simultaneously, ripped from the womb of the pre-Indian partition state. So this enmity, whatever you want to call it, it is there since birth. It is congenital, one might say. Is there an end to this, Sergeant? Because as you say, India is so much bigger, so much more powerful. Is it just going to be endless, insurgent terror-style attacks? Is there a way out of this?
David, it's been one of the more intractable problems on the planet for a long time. And, having thought through a number of different possible future paths, I can see the hopeful one and the not so hopeful one. And I'll try and describe both. The hopeful one is the classic Western liberal democracy, exposure, culture, education, and fundamentally Pakistan managing to find an identity that is rooted in some newly defined sense of Pakistani citizenship itself, as opposed to their two sources of identity at the moment, which is anti-India hatred and Islam. If that fact about Pakistan is able to change through time and through concerted efforts, both domestically and with the support of the international community, there is hope for us to return to the fundamental facts that remain, and that I think most Indians are happy to acknowledge, that we speak very similar languages, if not the same. We celebrate very many similar festivals. We truly do have a deep shared cultural history, civilizational history, and there really isn't much to separate Indians and Pakistanis if you meet them outside of this context. And so all of that remains the case. The thing that distinguishes Pakistan, I think, at a very deep level, really at the root of this problem, is the fact that in that schism that you describe, India didn't develop its identity along hatred of Pakistan or otherness from Pakistan. We did not develop our national identity with Hinduism at the fore. Instead, secularism and multiculturalism became really the core of what Indian democracy and civil society were about. Whereas on the other side, unfortunately, because of the specifics and the particulars of how partition occurred, and the fact that Islamic identity really was at the heart of why Pakistan had a reason for existence, they've ended up on this very narrow pathway where their identities are fairly negatively described and quite violently described as well in their own internal monologue. And so that's the hopeful version, where that changes through time. The slightly less hopeful version is just the evidence from anywhere else in the world does not tell us that it's easy to roll back the form of Islamicization that, frankly, the rest of the international community is also contributed to in Pakistan, right? So this issue goes back to the 60s and the 70s, a lot of Saudi influence, a lot of Saudi money, then Cold War era, strategic decisions by the United States to support a certain brand of Islam in order to be able to cause problems for the Russians in Afghanistan. And it sort of starts at a very strategic, instrumental level. And I think it's ended up being something that now might be very difficult for Pakistan to roll back from.
We're the same. Let's have more of that. Thank you very much for your time today.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much, David.
Thank you to Zia-ur-Rehman and Sarjan Shah. Join me, David Patrikarakos, next time as we continue to bring you dispatches from a world on the brink. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter, TikTok and Instagram at Apocalypse Now Pod, and you can get in touch via email at apocalypsenow@dailymail.com. We'll see you again next week as we ask once again, Apocalypse Now?
Out now from the Crime Desk, the home of arresting podcasts. Listen to our brand new high-stakes investigative series, Heists, Scams and Lies, unravelling the mystery behind the biggest domestic burglary in British history.
We've covered this incredible story since the day it broke, almost 5 years ago. It takes us from one of London's most exclusive streets to some of the roughest in Central Europe. Where are Tamara Eccleston's stolen diamonds?
Episode 1 is out now, with new episodes every Wednesday. Just search Heists, Scams and Lies wherever you get your podcasts. Don't want to wait? Become a member of the Crime Desk today and unlock the full series straight away. You'll get loads of additional member-only benefits, including ad-free listening across all our award-winning true crime shows, exclusive weekly episodes of The Trial Plus.
Join us on The Trial Plus as we dive deeper into exactly what's going on behind some of the most significant court cases in the world.
Early access to new podcasts launching later this year, like An Appointment with Murder,
a forensic examination of those who kill,
starting with the murderous habits of doctors who kill their patients,
or our harrowing upcoming investigative series, Charlene.
I'm Nicola Thorpe, and I'm in search of the truth of what really happened to Charlene Downs over 20 years ago. Somebody knows something.
Start your 7-day free trial today at thecrimedesk.com, or you can subscribe via Apple Podcasts.